Hey, how's everybody?
Guys, how exciting is this? I think we just need to give him another round of applause. So Joe, welcome to Mumbai and welcome to Film Companion.
Thank you.
It's so exciting to have you in the room, and I think I speak for everyone here when I say, cannot wait to see Endgame. I saw somewhere it said it's the cinematic event of the decade. And when I read that, I was just thinking, what is the pressure of creating the cinematic event of the decade? What's in your head right now?
We've been so hard at work on these 4 movies for the last 6 years that, we just had our heads down and we've been really focused on the work. And, I think that you can't make good decisions under pressure. So you have to block out all of that pressure. You have to ignore, all the fans expect something different from the movies. You're never going to please all of them. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we love this material. I grew up collecting comic books. I think, we understand the essential nature of the characters. We just try to make movies that make us happy. And then we hope that everyone else enjoys the stories as much as we do.
But do you read what's out there?
Certainly there's an advantage to the internet. There's also a lot of disadvantages to the internet. One of the advantages is that there's real-time information, and you can interact with fans, and you can get in, you can see how they're feeling about things. But again, ultimately, I think it's very dangerous to try to make things predicting how you think people will respond to it or trying to anticipate what it is that they want from it, because ultimately I don't think that they know what they want from it. And I think our job is to surprise you with storytelling and make choices that you're not expecting.
Well, we certainly weren't expecting that end.
Yeah. That's I think that, what we've tried to do, and it's we've lined up really well with Marvel in a way because I think we're deconstructionists. My brother and I like to pick things apart and deconstruct it. And I think you look at a lot of our comedy prior to our work with Marvel, Arrested Development Community, both would deconstruct the, comedy. And I think, Winter Soldier, we flipped things on its head. The good guys were the bad guys. In Civil War, we tore the Avengers apart. At the end of Infinity War, we killed half the characters. So, we're always looking for very disruptive choices to make that will, be exciting for audiences to experience. We certainly didn't expect the response that it got, though.
Yeah, we've all, again, I speak for the room, we've all spent the last year sort of going through the fan theories, trying to figure out who comes back and how. Right. And of course, you cannot speak to that, but tell us about arriving at this decision of killing off half of them. Was it a real struggle? And did you ever think, or was there even a moment of fear of how it would play?
I think that we felt like if we're going to tell that story, that we wanted to tell it in a way that would be impactful. And I think that the most compelling stories that I saw as a kid were the ones that surprised me. Where I got what I wasn't expecting, and they were the most memorable and the ones that have stuck with me through my whole life. Our intent is just to give that same experience back to the audience that we had, and so, I don't think there was really ever any doubt that we wanted to end it in that way, and I thought that it was unique to have the opportunity to make a movie of that scale and have the villain win. I don't know that that's ever been done in a commercial movie of that size, and I think that that's what audiences have responded to, is that the rug was pulled out from underneath them. And the movie is very carefully calibrated for your expectations to think that Thor is actually going to save the day. And the movie is sort of 2 competing points of view. Thanos as protagonist and Thor as protagonist, right? And had Thor successfully chopped his head off at the end of the film, it would have been Thor's movie. Thor did not do that. So it ultimately became Thanos' movie and Thanos' victory. So that's when the movie completely shifts into Thanos' point of view, because he's the victor in the film.
But the idea of the bad guy being the victor in the film, so you're saying there was no struggle with that at all? You all were on the same page with it, even Marvel and Disney?
I think that, we look at ways to make stories distinctive. And obviously when you're working in the commercial space and it's, every story is going to end optimistically, because that's what makes a movie commercial, is that it has a viability where there's hope and it attracts a larger box office because the expectation is that you're going to leave the theater feeling good. If we're going to do something that was different and we're going to take on a story of that scale, there was no question that we're going to do something risky. And, it had paid off for us successfully in Winter Soldier, and then Civil War did even bigger box office than Winter Soldier. And I feel like people are just so savvy with content now that they want and they demand surprises.
So also the idea of Thanos as another protagonist rather than the bad guy. I think he was definitely one of the more interesting things in the film because he was so layered, because there was a sort of emotional depth there, and his cause wasn't personal power or, the old school kind of
standard motivations. I mean, we're always looking for ways to make the villain three-dimensional, and you look at Zemo in Civil War, he had a very empathetic point of view. His family had been killed accidentally by the Avengers. Now he wants revenge. Even Alexander Pierce in Winter Soldier has what he would believe is an altruistic point of view. He's trying to be preventative about, future crime, and he wants to bring order to the world. Of course, by murdering 20 million people to do it. But I think that villains are always more compelling when you have a hard time putting them in the corner and just saying, oh, they're inherently bad. I don't think any villain thinks that they're the bad guy. They think that they're the hero in their own right. And Thanos is on a journey to save the universe, whether you believe it's misguided or not. He has a monastic dedication to that journey. He's willing to die for it. I think, what's interesting about him at the end of the movie is that once he completes the task, he shuns all sort of materialistic value, and he retires to a cabin.
So when you're actually scripting these characters with the writers, at what point do you know that they're layered enough? Is there a moment or a line, or what happens?
It's an iterative process, and I think what you have to do when you're working with this many characters is you have to justify why they're in the movie, and that takes months of sitting in a room in a very disciplined process of combing through the story. And characters will come in and go, and come in and go, and if we can't find a reason for them to be there, then they ultimately aren't part of the story. Certainly the ambition of a movie like Infinity War is to include all of the characters. That becomes very difficult work because there's no relief. You have to figure out a way that they all are intrinsically valuable to the narrative. So it really is just like rolling up the sleeves and committing to figuring it out.
Do you have like a board with characters? How do you do it?
Absolutely. So we literally sit in a room about half the size. Every wall is a whiteboard, and we'll have crazy ramblings written all over the place about ideas that we have. We have characters on cards, and we'll move the cards around depending on how we're going to group characters. And as we break a movie like Infinity War, there's versions of groupings that would have shocked people based on how the movie eventually turned out with which characters went where. I think at one point Thor originally was going to show up on Titan instead of in Wakanda, and it's always shifting depending on where the narrative's going. And then we ultimately felt that we wanted the climax to happen back on Earth, so now we put Thor on Earth, and so it's an evolving process. We're very hard on the material, and frankly, that process is iterative until we literally are handing it over to theaters to show to the audience. We're constantly massaging the material, whether it's through the VFX or reshoots or altering, what people say through post, through looping or ADR. So we have many tools that allow us to keep improving the material.
And at one point, you were looking at that board and you said, he dies, he dies, he dies.
Clearly, we wanted to make two distinctive films between Infinity War and Endgame. That's a trap that you can fall into when you're making a sort of quote-unquote two-parters, right? So, well, why did it need to be broken in half? Why did the two movies need to exist? Aren't they the same movie? Well, the ways that you can alter films are through tone and through point of view. And the tone is very different in Endgame, and the point of view is exceedingly different in Endgame, where, Infinity War was told through Thanos' point of view. Endgame is not. We're going to be very protective of the plots. That's all I'll say about that. But this is certainly the wrapping up the narrative that started 11 years ago with the original Avengers. This is their finale.
So Stan Lee said that Marvel comics sold the illusion of change.
Yeah.
Meaning that there was serialized storytelling, and every month you would see the character in this kind of life-altering crisis, but at the end the character would be in the same spot. Do you think Marvel films also sell that?
No, because we're on a journey to an ending, right? I think that comics, the point, there is like an endless serialization that lasted 60, 70, 80, 90, even 100 years in some cases. And I think that the notion of these stories, these movies, is that there's a whole new set of characters that are going to carry the ball forward from here. And you're seeing the emergence of them in Black Panther and Captain Marvel and Doctor Strange, and I think that this is it's all been building towards an ending, and we're firmly committed to stakes because I don't think there's any real value in storytelling without them. And and I think that the question, the essential question that Infinity War and Endgame ask is, what does it cost to be a hero, and is standing up for what you believe is right, is it worth the cost? And we're going to find out the answer to that question.
Cannot wait. Tell me, what are the rules of engagement when you're working with your brother? I saw an interview where he said that you pitch ideas. You're actually pretty different, and you have different creative ideas, but you pitch them at each other and try and convince the other person.
It is, and we use a process, a very argumentative process it's very passionate. People get a kick out of watching the two of us argue about how these stories play out, but I think that's where our process is so valuable, is that we test every idea, and it gets beaten up very hard, and we're both in service of the concept that best idea wins, and we'll go at each other really hard, and we'll go at the ideas really hard, and whoever is the last one standing, it's usually the best idea. So then that's the idea we take, and then we build around it. We keep, we keep engaging in that process constantly throughout the creation of the film, through the writing of it, the execution of it on set, and then in post, we're still, pushing back against each other about concepts.
Does it get angry?
No, I mean, I think that we've been doing it for so long, 25 years, that it's more like a spirited debate, than it is really getting super passionate about things. And the nice thing about working with your family is that no matter how passionate it gets, you go home at night and it's gone the next day. It's just, it leaves you.
But do you have any sort of no talk about movies over Thanksgiving dinner? Are there any sort of rules like that?
No, I mean, I think that we both grew up loving films, and that's where, we really connected with each other, was over a love of movies. And we evolved as we grew up. I mean, we first started watching really old films with our father on The Late Show, action thrillers from the 70s. That was it's exciting reward for us, was when our dad would let us stay up late and watch movies with him when we were younger. And then there was a Cinematheque, which was an art house that showed a lot of global cinema that opened up down the street from us. And then in our teen years, we started going to the Cinematheque and watching a lot of global cinema. So we've had periods of our life where genre was really important to us, and periods of our lives where art house cinema was really important to us. And then, but our love of cinema, translates to a lot of the same movies that everyone else loves: The Godfather and Star Wars, and all the seminal movies of our youth. And that's really what's inspired us to make Marvel films, is because they are reaching a greater audience, I think, in movie history than just about any films that have been made. And the global reach of these, and the global impact that they have, and the thematics that you can imbue these movies with that can touch people all over the world, is staggering. And I don't know that we'll ever have that opportunity again.
Which leads me to my next question. The success of these movies has actually sort of led to existential questions about movies.
Right.
I want to read something that A.O. Scott wrote in his review in the New York Times about Infinity War. He said this synergistic expression of the corporate interests of Marvel Studios and the Walt Disney Company, which now include 19 feature films and much else besides, has come to be less a creative or commercial undertaking than an immutable fact of life like sex or the weather or capitalism itself. What is your response, and what do you think comic books are doing to storytelling?
Well, I think, look, that's a highly cynical response, right? I think that like people who have those kind of responses to these movies are inherently threatened by them because they don't understand them or they don't relate to them, or the core mythology of the movie isn't interesting to them, or frankly, they just haven't been watching them, and so they feel excluded from whatever club this is, and it's unfortunate because I think that like I'm not a fan of lobbing grenades at each other. I think that everything has value, and clearly like these movies are reaching people on a scale and scope that has never been accomplished before, so there's got to be some intrinsic value to that. There has to be something important about what they're doing and saying. So I think the technology was changing the way that we consume content. I think that was the chicken before the egg with superhero films. I just think that, there's a different generation. You guys consume content very differently than you and I did.
Yeah.
I think that the two-dimensional, 2-hour film has had a really nice run. I think that ultimately that people crave connectivity and emotional connectivity in much longer spans than they do 2 hours. I just don't know that that is going to satisfy, this younger generation. I think that, serialization is really all it represents is that, I can commit 10 years of my life to the story and care about these characters and invest a lot of my lifeblood into them, so that when impactful things happen in the movies, I have a profound emotional experience, much more profound than I would over 2 hours because I spent 10 years invested in it. And I think Game of Thrones is that. I think that, any sort of, exploding, Netflix show or Amazon show, it's all they're doing is really feeding into the notion that I'm getting a 10-hour experience of characters now, so that if a character dies 8 hours into my 10-hour experience, it's certainly more impactful than if they die an hour into my 2-hour experience. It's like simple math. And so I think that that's the future of storytelling, and that it's best for every generation to then gracefully step aside and allow the next generation to tell stories in whatever way that they deem fit.
Okay, one last question, and I'll open it up to the audience. I have to ask, because there was just so much conversation about this on the internet, why is Captain Marvel wearing so much makeup at the end of the Endgame?
Well, what's interesting is that we shot our scenes in Endgame before they shot that movie.
Right.
And we don't sit in the makeup trailer and say to people, hey, we want you to wear more or less makeup. That's the choice that an actor makes. It's not we're not really involved in hair conversations unless like somebody needs to cut their hair or they want to make a radical choice. We allow the actors to make those decisions. So,
right.
That was, it might have been the first day she showed up on set to play that part and to play that character. And I think she was exploring what the character was. Those were the choices that she made. And I think as it evolved over time for her and she went to make the movie, that she made different choices. So, I think that's ultimately how it played out.
Do you ever get annoyed that everything is scrutinized so much?
No, I don't, because I think that, look, it's everyone's right to have opinions, and they can express those opinions. It's also my right to, ignore the opinions if I feel like that, they're either misguided or they're not helpful to us, But I do think we have to be careful moving forward with. I think one of the great problems with the internet is that it limits dialogue. It is about shouting in 50 characters really loudly an opinion that has no ramifications, very little pushback because there's not an incredible amount of dialogue. and I think that it creates a certain expectation about opinions, and that they can be shouted from the rooftops without any real ramifications. And I worry in a way that is a real detrimental aspect, because it tends to lean toxic. Yeah. And when there's no ramifications for behaving in a toxic manner, then it just encourages the behavior. Yeah. So, it would be nice, I feel like, if there were less toxicity on the internet, a little bit more constructive conversation. Yeah.
I don't see it happening though.
Yeah, no, I don't either.
Okay, guys, who has questions?
Hi, my name is Nishant.
Hey, how are you?
Thank you. I have a very small question, but I think it's very important. The question is, when you're working on a $1 billion film and all these mega stars are coming together to collaborate on a project, I'm pretty sure because of the past differences, there would be some sort of traffic or some sort of difference on the set. So how do you as a director handle that?
Between me and the actors, or me and the...
Probably the actors, between the actors, or even between you and the actors.
I mean, we've had a great working relationship with all the actors, and I think that, when we made very radical choices in Winter Soldier. We were like, we're going to go in a completely different direction with the character. I grew up reading comic books in the late 80s when people were questioning sort of the golden age interpretation of characters. They were trying to bring psychological realism to the characters. That's what I remembered liking about superheroes, is when you sort of take off the mask, who's behind it, and what do they feel, and why do they feel it, and why are they who they are. And so with Winter Soldier, I think we garnered a lot of trust because we made some very risky choices with the material, and Chris Evans just went with us, and the movie ended up being successful. And I think once we had done that, it created a lot of trust between us and all the other actors. And with each successive movie, as they're successful and the audience responds to them in the way that they do, that it just engenders even more trust. And so it's been a very easy process, and we come to set extremely focused, knowing exactly what we want, but we're really open to an actor having inspiration in the moment. And I think that they like that. They like that there's guidance, but there's also opportunity for change, and we're not intractable. Certainly, if someone comes to us with a better idea, we'll sit there on the set and rewrite the scene. But then you have to track the ramifications of that throughout the script. So you have to stay on top of the material. It can be very unwieldy.
Oh, hi Joe. There have been 21 MCU movies that have been released before Endgame, and there have been so many different filmmakers involved. Like every movie has a different director, cinematographer, production designer, maybe even the entire crew. How do you manage to maintain a similar visual style throughout most of the MCU movies, even though every project has so many different people working on it?
I mean, I think everyone's got their own style. I mean, our style is very different than James Gunn's style, which is very different than Taika's style and Ryan Coogler's style. So it's all, I mean, everyone approaches the movies their own way. The consistent through line in our films is what I just talked about, psychological realism. Like, I think if you go look at our movies, that there are real world stakes to them, there are real world problems, that the characters are humanized, even the villains are humanized, Thanos is humanized. So that's really what's important to us, and I think our interpretation of Thor is different than Taika's interpretation of it. He's playing with the absurd, and we're taking the elements that he handed us that were absurd, and then we grounded them. And by the end of the movie, Thor starts off Infinity War as a very comedic character, but by the end, he's the most tragic character in the film. So I think it's fun. It's an experiment where you have all these really interesting voices, like in a relay race, where you're just handing the baton off to each other, and then everyone runs the race the way that they want to run it until they hand the baton off to the next person.
Thank you.
Do you all ever get together in a room?
Occasionally, like we did a director's dialogue for a DVD, for the Infinity War on DVD. That's what I think the first time that all of us got together and did a round table and just sort of talked about things. Honestly, we run into each other on the way to the restroom in the Marvel building, and then stop and have like a 15-minute conversation about oh, what are you doing with this, or what's going on with that, and or we'll bring someone in the edit room so that they can see what we're working on. So when they're writing their script, they understand what we've done with the characters, and it's very casual. There's no real boundaries defined, but everybody's very respectful of each other's work, and there are no sort of mandates beyond like, well, this character is dead, so he can't use him in the next movie,
I had a question. Seeing how Infinity War and the trailer for Endgame, whatever was released, it's going in a slightly darker tone than the remaining MCU movies. Going forward, will you be adapting such darker tonal movies, like say the God Butcher storyline of Thor, or the Ultimate Universe that was created, or maybe even the Superior Spider-Man story? So will you be making a little more darker than the current how it goes around?
I think that the darker tones come from my brother and I. Again, like that's just things that excite us. Is like I guess putting characters under intense amounts of pressure to see how they'll crack or if they'll crack. And there's only real value in winning if you've gone through hell to get there. And I think that's really more reflective of life and truth, than not going through hell to get there. So I don't know necessarily that Marvel will choose moving forward to keep exploring darker tones. I think that's filmmaker specific. But we certainly we're interested in making very radical and disruptive choices at the end of each movie that we've worked on with them that always tended to lean darker.
Hello, Joe. First of all, I want to congratulate on the mega success of Avengers
Infinity
War worldwide, especially in India. It did humongous business. So my question is, how tough it is to keep plot under wraps when more than thousands of technicians work on one film, like for say Avengers Endgame or Infinity War?
So the way we keep everything under wraps is nobody reads the script. The actors don't read the script. So, Star-Lord doesn't need to know what Captain America's up to because they're in very different storylines. So Chris Pratt reads his storyline and Chris Evans reads his storyline, and that's all they need to know to motivate their choices as an actor. What's that?
What about Tom Holland? He's like a spoiler thing.
Tom Holland doesn't get to read anything, and that's unfortunately why we killed him off. Is he gave away too many secrets, so now he's dead. He can't give away any secrets.
Right?
Yes. I think we're very careful about who gets to look at the material. And there was one script that existed on Infinity War, and one script that existed on Endgame.
Just one.
It was on an iPad that was wipeable. We could press a button and wipe the iPad if it ever got lost. If people wanted to read it, key people, and there's probably, I could count them on two hands, how many people were able to read that script. They had to come to an office, a sequestered office on the lot, read the script, closed door. They were handed the iPad when they went in the room. They had to hand the iPad back to security when they left the room, and that was it. And that was just a couple of key collaborators on the movie, including our editor, production designer, director of photography, people who had to understand what the story was. I find it's easier for people to not spoil things if they don't know the story.
Right.
So it's easier for Mark Ruffalo to not spoil things if he doesn't know the story. What's that?
He was spoiled something on Instagram.
Yeah.
No, his phone was on.
Oh, he was doing an April Fool's joke, I think. And we actually fired him about 2 months ago on Twitter. So.
I'm so sad to let you go, Joe, but thank you. This was so much fun, and cannot wait to see what you have in store for us.
Thank you, and thank you for your great questions, and thank all of you for your very thoughtful questions. And my brother and I are exceedingly proud of Endgame. I think we feel like it's our best work for Marvel. So hopefully, you guys are as happy with it as we are. So happy viewing.
Thank you.